Every day at President Lincoln's Cottage, we engage with visitors in conversation on difficult topics, from grief to slavery to American identity. Visitors, young and old alike, connect with us from next door and from around the globe.
And occasionally we get asked a question on a tour that stops us in our tracks, one we wish we could spend a half hour answering. Some of these questions on their face seem innocent or simple, but on a second look, they contain a level of complexity that leaves us wanting to know more. Each episode, we'll investigate a single real question a visitor asked us here.
At President Lincoln's Cottage, we're storytellers, historians, and truth seekers, so we called on people whose expertise could speak to all the facets of these questions.
I'm Callie Hawkins.
And I'm Joan Cummins. This is Q and Abe. Come on down the rabbit hole with us.
Let's take that half hour now. For this episode, we're exploring the question, which chimney did Santa come down?
An elementary student asked me this question as soon as we sat down in the drawing room, which is the second time you see a fireplace on the tour of the cottage. I was able to say in the moment that since the Lincolns were only at the cottage in the summer, that Santa probably wouldn't have visited them here. But I was definitely left wondering about the possibilities.
As usual, we're going to be getting curious and exploring complex aspects of our topic today. So if you're listening with someone you would prefer did not ask questions about Santa, another episode might be a better choice for now.
The first thing I was wondering about was, would the Lincoln children even have been expecting Santa? What would they have wanted at Christmas?
Here's Ken Turino, who's just published the book Interpreting Christmas with Max van Belgoy, and has thought very carefully about how historic sites, particularly those of the Victorian era, can better talk about Christmas. If the Lincolns had been here at Christmas, what might it have been like?
During the period that the Lincolns were alive and potentially celebrating the holiday, it was evolving, very much so. Some of the traditions that we're familiar with today were really just in their infancy in the 19th century. I know they were serving Christmas dinners. We do know that. And there are accounts of one of Tad Lincoln in 1864. He embraced the spirit of the holidays and invited several cold and hungry newspaper boys for Christmas dinner, which was a surprise to his parents and to the chef, but they were welcomed in. And, that sort of goes with another tradition that was growing in America. That was helping out the poor, remembering others less fortunate than ourselves. That became something very much a part of Victorian literature. So A Christmas Carol gets published in 1843, and it was a huge hit. And I suspect the Lincolns, as many people in America in that time, read it or had it read to them or knew about it.
We also spoke with Penne Restad, a distinguished senior lecturer emerita at the University of Texas at Austin, who's a historian of Christmas in the U.S. She said,
in the 1850s, 1860s, there's really not much Christmas going on. Where it is it's local. For instance, what the Pennsylvania Dutch are doing in that region, or what the Germans are doing in that region, or what the Presbyterians are not doing in another region. It's really a matter of kind of local custom, not necessarily religious, although increasingly there's a question about having Christmas trees, because that's kind of pagan, which we don't generally regard as pagan now, but that had Christmas trees in Sunday schools to lure kids in so they come at Christmas time. And so eventually the tree migrated from the Sunday school into the church. And so it starts to kind of fan out gradually.
Ken added,
whether the Lincolns had a Christmas tree or not is not documented as far as I could find. What we do know is that the very first image we have of a Christmas tree was a drawing that was done either 1812 or 1819. It's in the Winter Tour collection, and it was done by a painter who was an immigrant from Germany. It's an illustration of a Christmas tree in a house that doesn't look much like our Christmas trees today, this little scraggly branch in the center of a table. And that's the first image we have. From that point on, it starts to gain in prominence. The earliest trees would have been tabletop, small, and they would have been decorated probably Christmas Eve with real candles. And if you've never seen a Christmas tree with real candles, you're missing an experience because they're quite extraordinary. There was usually a bucket of water near them, and we have documented descriptions of this. The trees would be usually in a closed room, and the candles would be lit. They would be decorated, and these were at first homemade ornaments. Then the doors would be open, and children in the family would come in to see the spectacle. And I have lots of accounts of people talking about experiencing their first Christmas tree. Some of the first female abolitionist Christmas fairs, which were raising money for abolitionism, there was a near riot to get in to see one in Boston because people had not experienced them. So they're growing and developing. There was a very famous print that appeared in London of Queen Victoria, and a lot of people hearing this might have seen it, with their husband and children in front of a tabletop tree. That appears in the London Evening News in 1848. And then in America, it comes over and with a little touch up, taking off some of the royalty aspects of the family, it shows up in 1850 on the front page of Godey's Lady's Book. And that had major exposure. So it's through reading about Christmas trees and seeing images of them that people first learn about the custom.
A lit Christmas tree is one of my favorite parts of the holiday, even with electric lights, so I'd be really excited to see one with candles. I'd like to know if they're truly riot-worthy.
What about during the Civil War, though? We know the war had a huge impact on the Lincoln family's experience of D.C. So, how was the conflict affecting people's celebrations of Christmas?
One quote I have from up here in the North in 1861 says, "Notwithstanding the pressure of the times and the fact that the nation is deeply involved in a war for its existence, the people of this city, and we presume the same may be said of other places, seem to enjoy the Merry Christmas as much as ever." So people did still celebrate. Yes, there would have been a damper on this because of that war. We do know, though, from Thomas Nast's illustrations, he shows the troops out in battlefields receiving gifts from home. There's actually several of those Christmas boxes, and the soldiers opening them and receiving gifts from their family. So gift giving we were talking about was prevalent. It did take place during the war. There's a great Nast illustration too of a man soldier in uniform, coming home on Christmas Eve on furlough. I think it's called furlough. And it's this beautiful scene of him rushing in, and the family, is all excited to see him because he's got a furlough from the war and he's able to spend it with them.
It strikes me that, not unlike our own time, this was also a time that families were extremely divided. And it makes me think about the strain that the war might have put on holiday celebrations for a holiday that's usually family-centric. Penny had something to add about Christmas as a unifier in a national sense.
As I followed this through in my thinking about this at the late 19th century, well, one, there's a national split, remains after the Civil War. I mean, the South develops its own particular character, and the North does its own particular character. And then there are all this arrival of all these immigrants. So there are lots of splits and separations and a tremendous amount of just technological change. I mean, if you think of trains and telegraph. And Christmas seems to be just in a meta way, a way of rejoining, of reconnecting classes, regions, and bridging those divides between all these newcomers and those people who have been in the United States for a long time. So it is kind of a broad and quite porous net to kind of draw people together.
I don't think a lot of people would picture Santa and the Civil War in the same room, but Penny says that not only was he there, but also he had a specific side he was rooting for.
Well, a lot of this comes from Thomas Nast. Harper's Weekly commissioned Nast, who is fairly new to the game in Harper's Weekly, to do a Christmas scene for the Union. You've seen the Christmas scene. There's Santa Claus, who's he's round and he's kind of weird looking, but he's got stars and stripes on him. Santa Claus, probably not to push this too much, is really a Union guy. And Lincoln was fully aware of his value as a Union guy.
We next spoke to Vaughn Joy, a Christmas historian and the author of Selling Out Santa, Hollywood Christmas Films in the Age of McCarthy. She specializes in the intersection between Christmas and American culture, and we wanted her help understanding the bigger picture.
Christmas has a particularly American quality to it that I find really fascinating. It has developed in our national history as this secular, almost patriotic holiday that can either be really damning about where we are as a country, or it can be really celebratory, really idealistic. And looking at how Christmas mirrors the moment that it is mirroring in any given point in American history can really tell us a lot about the cultural and political and economic and social kind of context of that period.
One of the things that's confusing to me about how people approach Christmas is that there seems to be a nostalgia for the idealized 1950s Christmas, which very few of us at this point were actually alive to experience. What's up with that?
We have this standardized version of Christmas in our public imagination that definitely rarely resembles real life and real life celebrations. And I think that's the really interesting cultural concept of Christmas, that it is an ideal. And that mirror that I was talking about of like in the public sphere, we can have this figure who gives gifts and cares about all children equally. But that's not reflected in a lot of our cultural or political or social contexts a lot of the time. And we have families who are together celebrating this moment, but for too much of our history, we've been at war, and there have been a lot of people who can't be home for Christmas.
This was thought-provoking for me because I feel like we have a similar situation with Lincoln. As Americans, we've built an idealized image of him that sometimes clashes with the reality of his historical experience. There's Lincoln the myth and Lincoln the person, whereas, as far as I know, there's only Santa the myth.
Speaking of Santa, in the original question, why are chimneys part of the story about Santa? Where does that association come from?
That is because of Clement Clarke Moore. If you were Dutch, well, you'd worry about your shoes and getting your shoes filled with toys or things like that. But he slides down the chimney, this little elfin Santa Claus. And he comes down the chimney. Instead of taking things, he's a peddler. I really like Steve Nissenbaum's explanation, so I want to give it all over to him. Here's a case where you've got a whole lot of unrest in New York of just young hooligan guys, and they're wild on Christmas. It's shooting and partying and tearing things down. Nissenbaum looks at this and says, but here is somebody who's a peddler, who's a suspect, a roamer, who doesn't really belong and is on the fringes of society and is not coming into your house to steal things or to take things from you or to trick you, does the reverse and comes down the chimney and brings things to children. There's all this reversal thing, but it's Clement Clarke Moore and down the chimney.
For expert insight on our chimneys at the cottage specifically, we spoke with our Director of Preservation, Jeff Larry. He says the cottage has 16 total, which is plenty to choose from.
He also has a theory about which one Santa would have used.
If it was modern Santa, a lot of those fireplaces are blocked off now, and that would make for an awkward situation for Santa. So let's go with Lincoln era Santa. So I was thinking, okay, so this is Lincoln's time. The fireplaces were being used for heat. So there's a pretty good chance there was a fire going in them all the time, possibly even overnight. And that maybe Santa would not want to drop down a chimney that had a big fire going at the bottom of it. And I thought, well, what chimneys or fireplaces in the cottage would possibly most likely not being used in the winter. In what we now call the East Wing, during Lincoln's time, it was called the summer kitchen. It's a part of the building that's sort of separate from the main house. And that's where they would do all the cooking in the summer so that you didn't heat up the main house. There is a winter kitchen in the basement, or there was in the basement of the cottage. But in the summer, it would be done over here. And my thought was, perhaps in the winter, they were not using the fireplaces in the summer kitchen. So that would be the safest choice for Santa to come down the chimney.
This is one of the things I love about working with Jeff is his matter-of-fact approach to problems. Which chimney is the safest would not even have occurred to me.
As you may know, the cottage is one of the earliest examples of Gothic Revival architecture in the United States. The architectural style came with some strong philosophical ideas attached to it about how a house should be constructed for the best possible living.
Probably the one person that was Gothic Revival's biggest fan was this guy, Andrew Jackson Downing. And at the time, he was probably better known as a landscape designer. But he wrote 2 books promoting the Gothic Revival style. The first one was Cottage Residences in 1842. And then his last book was The Architecture of Country Houses in 1850. And these were basically pattern books. You would get this book and you could see all the different designs of the cottages, landscape options. And Downing had a lot to say about even the most minute architectural detail of what was an appropriate choice for a Gothic Revival building. And that includes chimneys. He writes, "The prominent features conveying expression of purpose in dwelling houses are the windows, veranda, and chimneys. And for this reason, whenever it is desired to raise the character of a cottage or villa above mediocrity, attention first should be bestowed on those portions of the building. The chimney tops in all countries where fires are used are decidedly expressive of purpose, as they are associated with all our ideas of warmth, the cheerful fireside, and the social winter circle."
Downing also had firm opinions about what might bring a grown man to tears.
He has some strong words on smoky rooms, and this was in his second book. So he writes, "Of all the minor evils which flesh is heir to, there are few which so certainly bring tears into everyone's eyes as smoky chimneys. A man of nerve may steel his breast against a great misfortune. He may make no outward signs at the recital of griefs which would arouse a stoic, but take him into a room where the chimney does not draw well, and though he may be like Othello," and here he quotes Othello, "unused to the melting mood," meaning one that's not used to emotions, "he will find himself exhibiting all its outward signs, while his heart, strange to say, is growing harder every moment."
I love the first part that you shared with us about chimneys as a sign of hospitality and also wintertime, because when I look at the cottage, it doesn't matter what season it is, I am immediately like Christmas is conjured.
It's a welcoming. I think it's probably akin to the modern, and we'll leave the light on for you.
It'll be warm and safe in here.
Yeah.
Since many fewer houses have actual working chimneys anymore, how did we get to the point where the kid who asked this question would have been expecting modern Santa with a big beard and a red coat and a jolly disposition?
There is a constant stream of new Christmas cultural stuff, whether it's political cartoons or gift books from the 19th century, window displays, department store Santas in different suits, Santa schools from the early 1900s, books, movies, comics, like anything that you can think of. There's constantly a redevelopment of Christmas and Santa. So looking at the things that have survived out of all of those many, many, many versions is really interesting. And the Thomas Nast one is one that is so iconic. You have A Visit from St. Nicholas in 1823. Like these are the kind of high points that a lot of people could probably pinpoint. Some might go further back for 1809 with Washington Irving's depictions of Santa Claus in A History of New York. Like I said, Coca-Cola, like we have these like fine points. The reimagining of what it is to be American in the post-war period and the proliferation of Hollywood have really solidified, especially Edmund Gwynn's Santa Claus in Miracle on 34th Street, 1947, as the modern image of Santa Claus. And we have so much nostalgia for the 50s, even when we're not talking about the 50s. And the 50s can be a long period of that post-war period, including 1947 with Miracle on 34th Street, Santa Claus. And it's interesting, right? Because the next Santa Claus that we really get who sticks is probably Tim Allen in the 90s, who is irreverent and not your classic Santa Claus, but he's like a single divorced dad in the 90s, and he's relatable on so many levels. And that development also feels kind of right.
When I'm thinking about it, the adjustment from the 90s seems to me like a shift from Santa as an all-powerful, ethereal being, a deus ex machina, towards the idea that any ordinary person could be filled with the magic of Christmas and become the best version of themselves. I definitely remember feeling as a kid that it was partially on me to commit to the bit to make for a real Christmas.
I had a pretty intense experience with believing in Santa. I remember Christmases past where my sister and I would have this overwhelming anticipation for waking up and finding what Santa had left, and if he really would have come this time. There's so much family tradition around this in my family. I'll tell you, I fell to pieces when I learned the truth.
Since I've become a parent, I've been thinking a lot about how we talk to kids about Christmas and Santa. I kind of feel like I've got to get my story straight. Why is it so important to so many people that kids believe in Santa?
And it's a transcendental element of that. The belief in Santa Claus is almost, there's a certain rehearsing children in the transcendence of things. That there are things you can't see, there are things that are beyond your control, but also there are connections that you can't, all of these things are being explored to bring children into that idea, where all of these beliefs and folklore and community practices and religion, they all kind of are all these gauzy layers, and we live in such a world of practicality.
Right, that we want kids to practice believing in things that seem impossible, that being able to do that could be an important skill for other parts of life.
For me, the ability to deeply believe in things you can't see has served me as a bereaved parent. It's really enabled me to find joy and connection with a child I can no longer have a physical relationship with. So, I won't beat myself up too much for believing in Santa so hard, because as an adult, it's helped me out in other ways. The power of belief also comes up in our conversation with Vaughn in regards to one of my favorite Christmas movies, Miracle on 34th Street.
That film is about faith and belief, and do we as a society want to believe in Santa Claus as a being? Do we want to have faith in someone who is purely good, essentially, is the question of that movie, and who is generous and kind and willing to help people even if there isn't a profit motive? I do think that that is the base for the more modern films that have much more of a focus on the Tinkerbell effect of Santa, that if you don't believe in Santa or Christmas or the Christmas spirit, then it all goes away. And I don't think that's divorced from the political realities, especially of the last 30 years, where if you don't believe in democracy and you don't actively work for democracy, it goes away. And I do think Santa and Christmas are a real stand-in for those ideas, as they are so closely linked to American identity and politics and social and cultural histories.
Partway through our conversation about this episode, our producer Haley said, "Nobody has talked about religion yet," which of course is another major way people experience belief and faith at Christmas. What is Christmas' relationship with Christianity?
Penny and Vaughn both said that the cause and effect here is in the opposite direction from what you might think. The holiday came first.
We can say that because Christmas kind of started as a religious thing, but it really didn't center on Jesus's birth. But the Roman Saturnalia was really taking off. This is the 4th century AD. And so the Catholic Church is kind of thinking, here are all these potential converts, and they're out there doing wild things on Saturnalia. And part of the Saturnalia is to welcome in the new year. And so that involves a lot of greenery and tree boughs and mistletoe and anything that's green during the wintertime, palm fronds, you name it. And so increasingly, the church recenters the idea of focus onto the birth of Jesus. And that starts to coincide with what is the Roman Saturnalia. And then the Catholic Church is like, come on into the church. And the Catholic Church is willing to put up with the Saturnalia, with the idea is in time the people will come into the church and that we don't have to see it as a conflict.
The Christianization of Christmas really comes after Santa is developed in American context. And that's kind of confusing because like even the name Santa and Kris Kringle both come from these Christian kind of backgrounds. But the way the mythology develops, it's secularly. And there isn't even really like a Christian claim on the holiday of Christmas, until the late 1800s. It's an amalgamation of Saturnalia and pagan traditions, and also many different Western cultures that celebrated holidays around the end of December. So the American version of this holiday is that secular version. And obviously American anything is not a monolith. It is pluralistic always. So Christian traditions are also part of it.
In America, we're drawing from different traditions because we have these different immigrant groups. It's really the German immigrants in Pennsylvania where we have accounts as early as 1810 of Christmas trees. I talked about Queen Victoria and her husband. Don't forget, her husband was German, Prince Albert. Germany played a big role. Dutch contribute St. Nicholas. Along with that comes the tradition of hanging stockings. So we're bringing in these different aspects. Christmas creches are coming from the Italian immigrants. Mediterranean and Catholic populations come in and become a big part of many people's celebrations. So really, we're drawing from these different cultures to make our American Christmas.
And I think it's part of that whole idea that we see in a lot of Christmas media about keeping the faith and believing in Christmas. That applies to the many different versions of Christmas and the ones that we want to highlight. And I think we are really at risk of letting a Christian nationalist version of Christmas become that dominant narrative, especially with Christ in the name of the holiday. There's a claim that can be made, and that's unfortunate because it strips away all of the other influences on the holiday as potentially fake versions of it, or not the real version, because there is this kind of Christian connection with the name of Christmas. But I truly believe, and also history shows us, that it is not a Christian holiday. Definitely not in the way it developed in the US. There's no straightforward kind of version of what Christmas is. It's always plural. So I think Christmas is like America. It is plural. It has so many different cultures and communities influencing it and lending to its traditions and being this fascinating, diverse thing that has come to represent or have avenues that can represent all of Americans and all of America. And we need to keep that in mind, again, to fight for the version that we want it to be and not let a narrower view kind of take over what it is now and take over its history and then what it might become.
If you have a narrow view of what America should be like, a narrow view of what a family should be like or a celebration should be like, then that is reflected in your approach to Christmas.
I think it really narrows the idea of what Christmas actually is, and especially an American Christmas. And if that faith brings you to goodness, goodwill, kindness, generosity, loving your fellow man, living for your neighbor, praise be. I'm happy for you. I love that for you. That is my idea of Christmas as well. And I'm happy that you and I can share that idea of the holiday while coming to it with our own perspectives, because that's American, isn't it? We don't have to agree on how we got to the point, as long as we do agree that the most beautiful parts of Christmas are being kind to one another and being generous and caring for each other.
If you're listening when this episode comes out, Christmas is coming right up. But we think it can be meaningful at other times as well.
I asked Vaughn, why think about Christmas not at Christmas? If holiday spirit is all about taking care of each other, why can't we do that all year round?
It's a great question, and one that I think about a lot as I study Christmas all year round. And that's the message of a Christmas Carol, right? Is to carry Christmas in your heart all year round. Or not even the message, it's kind of the challenge of a Christmas Carol. That we should be living up to who we are in December, or who we would like to be in December, who we'd like to think that we are. And I think that's why studying Christmas is very important to me, because it is that mirror, right? There's a scholar, Stephen Nissenbaum, who wrote A Battle for Christmas. And in his intro, he has this gorgeous paragraph about what Christmas, and specifically an American Christmas, because ours really is unique, what it can mean for the nation and for individuals. And it's a time, I'm going to butcher his quote, but it's a time to think about who we have been, who we are currently, and who we want to be. And I think if we approach Christmas in that way and practice actively, like all of us are actively thinking about who have we been as a nation, as an individual, as a community, on whatever level you want to, or all of them, who are we currently and who do we want to be? I think that's the powerful part of Christmas. And I think a lot of the time that does get stripped out of how we read Christmas media, how we experience a lot of it. We've treated Christmas and Christmas media as this thing that's just on in the background while we're like decorating or opening presents. Christmas music is played constantly on radios and in stores, and it's not something that we're consciously really thinking about. And I think a lot of Christmas has become this kind of passive thing. But I think that's something that, at least specifically with Christmas, we could do better about in the modern day, is thinking about it more. Thinking about why we have these traditions, why we have imbued this holiday with such American values, and then how do those values actually function? What do they look like in practice? How can we get back to practicing everything that Christmas stands for all throughout the year?
Whether you are celebrating Christmas or not, we hope you and yours have some warmth to gather around right now.
We want to encourage you to think about, what work can you do to help those around you? If we're remaking the image of democracy just as we have reimagined the image of Santa, what do you want democracy to look like?
This episode was produced by me, Joan Cummins, with Callie Hawkins, Haley Bryant, and additional support from the President Lincoln's Cottage team. Music for Q&A was written, performed, and is copyrighted by Clancy Newman.
Your support makes Q&A possible. If you enjoy coming along for the journey with us, please show your support by making a contribution at www.lincolncottage.org. Whether it's $5 or $500, we really couldn't do it without you. You can also support us by hitting subscribe, by leaving a review, or by sharing with friends.
To the kid who asked me this question, thanks for helping us think about things that seem impossible but could make the world around us better.
Comments? Questions? Write to us at podcast@lincolncottage.org.
President Lincoln's Cottage is a home for brave ideas. Stay curious.